exist in Hollywood. So the reason why we're looking at this, I will explain throughout the program, is that a lot of people's perceptions, non-Muslims' perceptions of Islam and Muslims is through media. So a lot of people have never had a Muslim friend, and the only way they know what Islam and Muslims, what they are and what they believe, is what they see on the film, what they read in the newspapers, and what they see in the media, in news. And obviously we all know that the perception of Muslims in the media is negative. For whatever reason, we can discuss a little bit more in the program, but it's negative. So unless we realize that this is going on, we can't fix it, we can't counter it, and we can't make the future better for our children. And I say this because there's Imam Ali alayhi salam, in one of his lectures in Nahj al-Balagha, letter number 33, he discusses, and I'll read the middle part, you can read all of it, but I'm going to read the middle part. It says, this is Imam Ali speaking to his children. He goes, certainly the heart of a young man is like uncultivated land. It accepts whatever is strewn on it. So I hasten to mold you properly before your heart hardens up and your mind gets occupied, so that you may be ready to accept through your intelligence the results of experience of others and be saved from going through these experiences yourself. Now, I believe Imam Ali alayhi salam is saying, and if you read the beginning of the speech that he gives, he goes, whatever affects my child will affect me, and however my child suffers after me is gonna, whatever befalls him befalls me. So we are responsible to make the society better for our children. And this is what Imam Ali is saying, is whatever pain they go through, we go through. So we have an obligation to make the society that we live in London, in America, or whatever, to be more accepting of Islam and Muslims. And we know, especially our mothers and our sisters and our daughters who wear hijab, it's going to be very difficult for them to walk the streets when there's Islamophobia everywhere. It will affect them. And when you want to go and apply for a job, when you want to go get onto a plane, all of us have read articles that's affected people. So this is the reason why we're discussing Islamophobia in Hollywood specifically. And why Hollywood? Well, in 2017, Hollywood and other US studios together released over 100 films. This does not include smaller independent productions that were made. In 2017, the domestic box office revenue from films in the US was under $11 billion. In global box office revenues stood at $28 billion for 2017. That's just 1 year. Now, when we say 28 billion people, that means in America alone, 1 billion cinema tickets were sold. That doesn't take into consideration how many times films would have been seen on DVD, downloaded, and even on broadcast TV. So we can see how cinema, forget documentaries, forget TV shows, forget news, forget newspapers, how much cinema is spent on it and how much it influences and how many people watch it. Hollywood, the Hollywood industry has always held a strong fascination for many viewers around the world, and I include myself in them. It is the place where the world and dreams are developed, and the same place where enemies and nightmares created. Hollywood system, over a century old, so it's 100 years old, has a prominent position in the United States and the world for representing many aspects of American foreign society and peoples. Its films are viewed all around the world and have the power to reinforce or shatter negative stereotypes and create positive representations. The films that cost millions of dollars to produce and distribute are exported to almost every corner of the world. And they encapsulate within them not only forms of entertainment, but the construct that influences and guides its viewers' perception of the US and the world and the people they show. Bearing in mind that this most powerful and influential global medium is in the hands of a small group of people, and it can be wielded like a sword and cause massive amount of damage to different ethnic and religious groups, here Islam and Muslims. It is incumbent upon academics of different fields to examine every angle of Hollywood's production and its relationship with the government and corporate entities, political lobbies, and influential individuals whose impact influences millions of viewers in US and around the world. And I'll refer back to how the government is involved with Hollywood down the lecture. Films are creative and smart with the use of psychological methods. Like all art, films are produced by human mind, depicting human action and for the human mind to consume. An individual also needs to be trained to question the complicated and manipulative media content that is viewed. This is a very important point because many viewers who watch Hollywood films at times cannot differentiate between a real representation and a caricature one. If not on a conscious level, then at least on a subconscious level. Viewing negative images and representations over a long period of time in different films and scenarios can become confused with the reality in the viewer's subconscious. So if you keep seeing Muslims in a negative way over and over and over, if you're not a Muslim, you're going to think every Muslim is a bad person. Simple as that. For example, in the good and bad guys concept for films, there's always a good guy and a bad guy fighting each other. When the bad guy is hurt, there's no sympathy towards him. You don't feel bad for him because he's deserving of that punishment. Now let's take the idea of good guy and bad guy and apply it to what one of the academics called Helen Van Haller described as the idea of bad violence and good violence. The further a group of people are from the culture, religion, and ideology of the US, because don't forget, Hollywood represents US. They don't care about Middle Eastern values, they don't care about Chinese values, they represent the US values. In other words, the greater the distance of the otherness, so anyone who's not part of that idea that Hollywood has is otherness, is the other, the more negative they are perceived. And it is a legitimate form of response to show violence towards them and neutralize them. And that violence is a good violence. So if you're hurting a baddie who happens to be a Muslim who attacks the US, that's acceptable, there's nothing wrong with that, that's good. In contrast, film villains practice bad violence. That is violence that threatens those in power and citizens of that country. So the violence that a terrorist shows, that's not acceptable. That has to be punished. It is important to understand where the sources of American culture and thought process originate from. Two academics, Greenberg and Gottschalk, suggest that a wide range of influences have shaped American popular culture. Popular culture includes cinema, media, novels, comic books, music, anything to do with what we consume on a daily basis. The culture, American culture, don't forget America before was Native Americans. There was no African Americans there, there was no white people there, there was Native Americans there. And after the Europeans went, other people followed or they were taken there as slaves. So there's a mixture of multi-ethnic input from around the world being recognized in the new American identity. However, the biggest influence has been from the European group and its form of Christianity. There's millions of African Americans, there's millions of Chinese, there's millions of Hispanic people, but most of the politicians are white male. Most people in the Hollywood are white male. The ideology of they talk about is Christian ideology. So the European Christian ideology dominates that country. The view is shared by many academics. American culture in its generality is an extension of the European sensibility to the New World being America. But a sensibility transformed by the experience of transposition. So the European identity has been taken from Europe and put into America with changes. The US identity, no doubt, has been and will be shaped by the mixing of Native American, African American, Jewish, and other ethnicities and cultures from around the world. but the most dominant overriding influence and the lens by which the US and the rest of the world sees US is through the experience of the European Christians and their descendants. Now you think, what's this got to do with Hollywood? Well, the way the Europeans used to see Muslims affects how the Americans will see Muslims. Now I'm going to play, if you turn the light off, I'm going to play a clip from one of the most successful films, and probably the most successful horror film, or one of the most successful horror films ever made. It's called The Exorcist, and I'm going to play it and then you'll realize what I'm going to say after. I didn't show you the whole film because it's too scary. But did you notice that there was nothing, it was black. Then there was scary music. Then there was red writing. Then when it said The Exorcist, all of a sudden, Allahu Akbar, Azan started. Then you watch the movie, then it goes from the sun and it goes into a red scene. So red always signifies blood and violence and scariness in horror movies. Then from then it goes into northern Iraq where they dig and they find some stuff, and then it goes back to America. The story goes to America. Throughout the whole story, it has nothing to do with Islam. It has nothing to do, no, there's Muslim character, it has nothing to do with Islam. Why would the director choose to use the azan in the most, in a scary way where it had nothing to do with the movie, nothing to do with the story? If he wants to represent Iraq, where this digging is taking place, he could have used 50 other kind of sounds and noises. Every single thing you see in a movie is selected for a specific reason. Now this director, we're going to refer back to him, because you could say, well, this was maybe he didn't know, it was an accident or whatever. We're going to refer back to him and I'll show you more discussion of why I know this director has Islamophobia embedded in a lot of his work, not just one film. So the misconceptions by Americans that Muslims have completely differing opposing values to the normal American is one of the major issues that has assisted this hostility. These misconceptions and hostilities have found their way into the media narrative and especially Hollywood. However, Islam is neither a race nor an ethnicity. It has no geographical or cultural barriers. It is a religion practiced by individuals from every race, culture, and ethnicity. It may be the right time that legislation is introduced to protect Muslims from the current spread of Islamophobia. Same way we have anti-Semitic legislation or anti-hatred legislation, but it has to be specific for Islam. The Islamophobia that is rampant in the media and especially in films require identification, diagnosis of where it's coming from, and plans put into place to prevent the increase and spread of anti-Muslim and Islamophobic views. Islamophobic films have been around since the beginning of Hollywood, from 1920, when they were starting to make the first Hollywood films. There was representation of Muslims in a negative way, but have become more dominant since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of communism. Up to the end of the Cold War, 1991, communism and the Soviets were the main villains in Western film narratives. Living in a Western country, most Muslims find that their neighbors or colleagues do not know much about the religion of Islam. And what little they know about Islam comes from the news, articles they read, and films that they have seen. The problem is most of what they depicted, written, or shown is inaccurate and biased against the religion of Islam and its devoted adherents. Most people living in the West would not know that all Arabs are not Muslim. There are many Arabs who are Christian. And most Muslims are not Arab. If you go to Indonesia, a population of 200 million, 90% Muslim. There's more non-Arab Muslims than there are Arab Muslims. But if you lived in America or in UK and you didn't know anything about Islam, you would think otherwise. They would be surprised to know that Islam encompasses every race, ethnicity, nationality, and culture on the planet. Muslims speak hundreds of diverse languages, from Swahili, Arabic, Turkish, Russian, Persian, Urdu, Hindi, Bangladeshi, Sinhalese, Bahasa Indonesian, to scores of local Southeast Asian, Central Asian, and Caucasian dialects. So this is where it gets interesting, the relationship between Hollywood and politics. Most, if not all, Hollywood films seem to either back or support, in one way or another, each US administration's continuous attempt at dominating the territory and political landscape of the Middle East. Next time you see a film where there's a war going on in a Middle Eastern country, just look to see how the Muslim or Arab country has been represented, and just see how it's the other group, be it American, Israeli, or anything else, is being represented, and you'll see. They do this by continuing the stereotypes of the otherness of the Middle East in Hollywood films. It's no coincidence that so many Hollywood films depict Muslims as villains. Another academic, Sally Totman, argues the soft power of the US is through Hollywood, and the relationship between the US foreign policy and Hollywood representation of rogue states is hand in hand. Gordon Arnold, an academic, argues Hollywood links the themes of its films to a greater sense of US decline, furthering the argument that Hollywood is not a vacuum from American society, but in many cases reflecting the fears of the US. Another academic, Tricia Jenkins, if you notice, all of these academics, none of them are Muslim. They're all non-Muslims, and they're talking about what we're talking about here. Tricia Jenkins argues the CIA becoming more involved with the Hollywood system, providing liaison officers to help facilitate films that show the CIA in a positive way. So they'll say to the filmmaker, we'll give you a liaison, we'll give you the way we will do something as CIA agent. Would even give you access to Langley, which is the center for CIA headquarters, to film there, but you have to show us in a positive way. Even if there's a place where they've done something which is negative. The filmmaker was like, well, I'll have access to Langley, I'll save money, okay, let's do it. He doesn't care. David Robb, an academic, argues in detail how Hollywood filmmakers will change their films to obtain support from the Pentagon. Pentagon is the Defense Department of the United States. Problem is, when the Pentagon is conducting wars in different countries and war on terror, it is the Muslims who become collateral damage by these trying to save money producing films and those who want to promote the ideology on the war of terror. And this has been documented, where American filmmakers from Hollywood will go to Pentagon. They will say, we want to have access to like 5 helicopters, 5 tanks. Can you give us 500 soldiers to be extras? And the Pentagon will say, we need to see your script. The script will be sent to them. They'll go through the places that they think the script or the story shows the US Defense Department and the military in a negative way, and they will scratch those bits out, or they'll make changes. It'll go back to the filmmaker. He will say, well, I'm saving myself $10-15 million. I'm going to have access to real military equipment. Okay, I'll make those changes. And if the US the Defense Department is battling Muslims around the world, who's going to suffer? The Muslims. They're going to show themselves in a positive light. Many scholars and historians use the date 11th of September 2001 as the major turning point of the deterioration in the relationship between the media and the United States and Muslims. I would argue that the challenging relationship between the US media and Muslims goes back further than September 11 attacks in New York. Hollywood representation of Muslims and Islam, the end of Cold War in 1991, so that's when the Soviet Union collapsed, removed, albeit not completely, because now we still have Russians as baddies, one Hollywood villainous enemy, the Soviet Union and the communists, and replaced them with another, the jihadi violent Muslim, who threatened the very freedom that the United States was built on. The change of face for the villains in Hollywood films was not a sudden shift. As we discussed, Islamophobia has always been there in the background in American movies, but has always existed in the Hollywood productions, if only faintly at times. And I can give you an example. If you remember, there was Rambo 1, Rambo 2, and then Rambo 3. Rambo 3 was produced in 1988, and it was about mujahideen fighting the Russians, the Soviets. And Rambo, an American soldier, gets support from the American military to fight along the Mujahideen against the Russians. 3 years later, 1991, the Soviet Union collapses. All of a sudden, the same Mujahideen who were fighting alongside Americans became terrorists because there was no more Soviet Union. So they had to find another enemy. There was no more Soviet Union. Who's the next one in line? Muslims and Islam. Nolan Migant, another academic, argues that Hollywood after 9/11 made efforts to provide more sophisticated representation of Muslims. But she admits that the positive change are mild and not significant. Tom Pollard argues that the films released by Hollywood after 9/11 are more pessimistic and dark. So there's an argument between academics who look at Hollywood and how it represents different ethnicities and religions, that some say after 9/11 there was an attempt to make a nuanced, layered representation of Muslims, good, bad, whatever. Other academics say no, they just may show one good character, but then they're showing 10 more negative characters. So overall, it's more negative and pessimistic. These academics, Tim Smerling, Helen Van Haller, and Jack Shaheen, their work on the Hollywood vilification of Arabs are important. They deal with the racial aspect of Islamophobia and how Arabs are negatively stereotyped in most Hollywood films. The Arabs are mostly, if not exclusively, Muslim in Hollywood. So as I said, in Hollywood they think all Muslims are Arab and all Arabs are Muslims. Now let's look at the specific film rules of engagement. This is the film that we're going to refer to. If you look, it's the same director, William Friedkin, as The Exorcist. That was made in 1973. This was made in 2000. It's about an attorney, Tommy Lee Jones, defending an army officer on trial for ordering his troops to fire on civilians after they stormed the US Embassy in Yemen. That's this character, played by Samuel L. Jackson. The movie was filmed in Morocco. It wasn't filmed in Yemen. Yemen didn't allow it to be filmed there. And directed by the same director as The Exorcist. It was produced and released by Paramount Pictures, which is a major Hollywood studio. And the film rules of engagement was described as, I'm quoting now, probably the most racist film ever made against Arabs by Hollywood. And who says this? Hussein Ibish, a spokesman for the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. Rules of Engagement reveals the enduring strength and persistence of stereotypes of violent, hateful Muslims dedicated to destroy the United States and the West. We keep thinking United States, but whatever happens there reflects here. Don't forget Theresa May and Donald Trump. I don't want to make it political like to that level, but if you look at, they have this special relationship. This special relationship affects everything. It's not just about trade. It's about security, it's about media, it's about how people are represented. The movie works even without the 9/11 worldview. So this film was released 1 year before 9/11 happened, the Twin Towers that came down. But after 9/11, the damage inflicted by such stereotypes is much greater, and I'll show you why. Jack Shaheen, the professor, Jack Shaheen is a Lebanese Christian scholar, but he's done a lot of work to show Islamophobia and anti-Arab attitudes in Hollywood and media in America. Notes that during the times of war and conflict, this sort of stereotyping meets little resistance. So when this film came out, a year later, September 11 happened. And then you have scenes like this. When they see this and they see the 9/11 buildings come down, they're going to think all Muslims are like this. Because they have it in the news, in articles, and they have it in the movies as well. It's happening in real life, and it's happening in stories that are told to them. Now, in this part of the film, this is part of the film where you can see in this part, there's the Yemeni men who are attacking the American embassy, are shown attacking the US embassy in Yemen. What stands out the most from this clip, this is a shot of the clip, the slide of the part of the film, is two women standing beside the men with weapons. and one of the women is carrying a young child. I mean, when would this happen in real life? If someone's fighting, what woman would stand next to the man? He would run and she would run and hide. He would not allow her to stand there because she might get shot. But the director, don't forget, everything you see happens for a reason in the film. There's a very clear message in the shot. It is saying that not only are the men trying to fight against the US and its values, but Muslim women, especially ones who wear full hijab, stand by their men. Even if there's danger involved, and they're still supporting their Muslim men in the fight against the US. The woman carrying the child indicates that even the child that are too young to fight now will grow up to be like their fathers and fight against the US. So with one shot, this film has brushed all Muslims, men, women and children, with the slander of terrorism and violence. Now we see in this shot a Muslim woman dressed in full abaya, so that she stands out from the lighter colors. So she's wearing black, everything else around is light, so she stands out quickly to the audience. And she's carrying an AK-47. She's not carrying an American weapon, she's carrying an ex-Soviet weapon. To that extent, they think about what goes in the hand of who when they're shooting. And she's shooting towards the embassy and the US soldiers. Her face is covered in red cloth. If you remember, we discussed that red signifies blood, violence and evil. In The Exorcist, it started turning red. The title of the film was in red. These are all selected for psychological reasons. There's no accident in film. She could have had a black face, but intentionally they put red. In the previous slide, we witnessed how Muslims support their men to fight, how Muslim women support their men to fight the US. In this shot, the audience are shown women in complete hijab using weapons to fight and try to harm the US embassy and soldiers. So there's no ambiguity. The women even want to fight with us. Over time, films like this help foster the hate that US citizens and other non-Muslims who view these films have towards women. Now I'm going to show you another clip. This is the cream of the crop, this one. This is a young child that has a gun in her hand. This shot is the most powerful and devastating shot of the three. The shots built up for the audience the tension of who the enemy is. First men shooting at the US embassy, then followed by women, and finally children. So even children raise weapons to fight the American embassy. A girl who is shown, so this girl was shown throughout the film walking on crutches. She was shown innocently. There was, like nothing scary about her because she had one leg missing and she's wearing pink. And throughout the whole film, she wears the same color clothes. So the audience know who she is. At this part of the film, she's shown with as a violent child, soldier or terrorist. Now let's take a minute to put this picture put together. The producers of this film are given, by the way, this film was written by the Undersecretary for the Naval Defense of the United States under Ronald Reagan. So the scriptwriter for this film was part of the Reagan administration in the Defense Department. The producers of this film are giving us a very powerful message here. They're saying that no Muslim, man, woman or child can be trusted. That all Muslims, doesn't matter of age or gender, are out to kill Americans. And if any of them are killed by the US military, be it in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen or anywhere else, don't worry, they want to kill us anyway. So when you see collateral damage in the news, you see this so much that you think, well, it doesn't matter, they were going to kill us anyway, even if it's a child. The director of the film, William Friedkin, stated in an interview, and I quote, so he said, let me state right up front, this is the director saying, the film is not anti-Arab, it's not anti-Muslim, and it's certainly not anti-Yemen. I just shown you 3 slides of the film, not even the whole film. And the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee said otherwise. It's the most racist film they had ever seen against Arabs. Now, we as viewers believe that he's telling us in this interview that he said it's not, anti-Muslim. While promoting his film, obviously he's trying to promote his film. What he has produced in at least 2 of his films, so the first one we saw, Exorcist, and this one, and I think I've seen other films of him which has Islamophobia in it, that is contrary to what he's saying. Each religious, now my advice is, how do we counter this? It's good, okay, we found out there's these problems, but what do we do? Is there anything we can do about it? Each religious center, a group of Muslims, whatever, mosque or organization, in each city needs to have a media team. So one or 2 people who get together. This team will then be responsible for viewing and reading media content and spotting where Islamophobic content is found. This will then need to be referred as an official complaint to the newspaper or media content producer, in this case Paramount Pictures, who has produced the content. If that doesn't work, then you must contact the relevant regulatory body and make a complaint made to them. If every major city in UK had 1 or 2 committees like this, imagine the impact and importance we can afford the fight against Islamophobia. Now, I finished my lecture, and this is my advice on how we can counter it.